The chandeliers in the private dining room threw gold across the glassware, and for a heartbeat, I let myself believe the shimmer meant something like a marriage could glow if you lit it well enough. Evan had insisted on the navy dress, the one that fit like I'd been poured into it, and he'd booked the Union Club's prettiest room as if romance could be rented by the hour. Friends and neighbors drifted between tables, laughing too loudly, whispering just enough that the pauses scratched at my nerves. Evan lifted his flute with that practiced smile he used for clients, and I lifted mine because that's what a wife does when the room is watching. The door at the back opened, and a flash of vermilion cut through the candlelight, a dress, a curve, a scent too sweet for a formal dinner. Sabrina Cole stepped in without an invitation, chin tipped, like she owned the night, like she had always belonged in the picture. Evan didn't look at me first. He looked at her. Before I go on, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever had a moment when the room went quiet and the truth got loud. If this kind of true family story speaks to you, tap like and subscribe so more of us can find our way back to dignity one chapter at a time. I wasn't always the woman counting breaths under crystal chandeliers. Once I was the girl who loved good paper and clean fonts, building brand kits out of a one-bedroom apartment and believing the quality of your work would always be enough. I grew up in a solid Midwestern house where you didn't flaunt money and you didn't betray people, where my mother taught third grade and my father fixed anything with a motor and a grumble, where love meant showing up, not showing off. Evan showed up at a Chamber of Commerce mixer with rolled sleeves and big plans, all charm and calloused hands, talking about growing his father's company into something that would outlast the trucks and the seasons. He made me feel chosen, and I let the choosing rearrange my life in quiet, reasonable steps. A marriage in a white brick church, a starter home that became a bigger home, a beautiful baby who taught me the rhythm of the night, and a decision to hit pause on my clients because family needed my hands more than my invoices did. When my grandfather's inheritance came, I signed it over to expand crews and buy new equipment, because Evan said ours and I believed him. We were the sort of family that looked good from the sidewalk. Saturday pancakes, a wraparound porch with Fern's block party casseroles labeled in careful handwriting. Evan grew into nicer jackets and newer trucks, and I learned the invisible labor of keeping a life polished. The shirts steamed for bids, the sitter scheduled when weather turned the note in Ava's lunchbox that said, "You are brave," in pink marker. On warm evenings, neighbors drifted across our driveway to trade stories about roof repairs and school fundraisers. That's how Sabrina slid in all sunshine and sponsored posts, passing Evan a pie with a flourish and laughing at things that weren't quite jokes. She had a habit of standing too close when she asked about paint colors, of letting her wrist brush his when he handed back a serving dish, of telling me how lucky I was to have a husband who could do anything. I learned to file away the small things, the late texts labeled crew issues, the phone turned face down, the new cologne he swore was from a client gift bag. Some nights, I pressed my forehead to the cool pane of our back door and told myself every marriage has seasons, and maybe this was the kind where you plant, wait, and trust the seeds. My mother worries in practical ways, and on the afternoon I told her I might step back into consulting. She said, "Don't lose yourself in someone else's dream, honey," then packed Ava a snack for the park. I didn't think I had lost myself. Not really. I thought I had pressed pause long enough for Evan to make good on the word ours, and then I would unpause and find my name again on the work. When he suggested a formal celebration for our 10th anniversary, I said yes, because marking time felt like a promise, kept 10 years of weathering and building, rising and mending a life worthy of a toast. He picked the Union Club and told me to choose something show-stopping, and I did, because I wanted to believe we had earned a little spectacle. On the morning of the dinner, Ava twirled in the doorway of our bedroom and asked if there would be cake. I kissed her hair and told her I'd bring her home a slice with a sugar rose. Somewhere between her question and the zipper on my dress, a thought slid through me like a draft. Why does a celebration feel like armor? The Union Club smelled like lemon oil and old promises, and the first hour ran on rails, sea bass on china, laughter too easy. Evan's hand light at my waist whenever someone took our picture. I watched him tell the story about the time his crew re-roofed a church in one weekend, how the pastor cried when the last shingle went down. How we take care of people was the whole point. He looked like a man who kept his word, and I wanted that to carry all the weight I could no longer name without trembling. The waiter refilled my glass, and the chandeliers chimed in the air conditioner's sigh, and then the door opened at the back, and a bright red dress crossed the threshold like a line drawn through the night. Sabrina's perfume arrived before her smile, and the room adjusted itself around her, a slow pull like tide. Evan's eyes found hers, not mine, as if the toast he'd been planning had a different recipient all along. I set my glass down carefully because crystal breaks loud, and in that hush, I understood that part 2 of my life had just walked in wearing lipstick the color of a warning. The moment Sabrina stepped into that dining room in her scarlet dress, the air shifted. She wasn't invited, but she acted as if she were the guest of honor, smiling just enough to set every whisper in motion. Evan rose from his chair as though she had been the reason for the gathering all along, and I felt the bottom drop out of the night. The smile he gave her wasn't casual or friendly. It was the kind of smile a man doesn't reserve for his wife. I wanted to believe he would laugh it off, say something foolish but harmless, let the tension pass. Instead, his voice carried across the tables, deliberate and sharp enough to silence forks. "There she is," he said, his eyes locked on Sabrina. "The woman who makes me feel alive again." A ripple of shock broke through the crowd. Mark Cole, seated near the back, froze with his glass halfway to his lips, his face paling under the chandelier's glow. I tried to steady my breath, tried to convince myself I'd misheard, but then Evan stepped forward and kissed her. It wasn't a polite greeting, not even a mistake. It was long and certain meant to be seen. Gasps filled the room, and I couldn't hear anything but the pounding in my ears. Sabrina smirked over his shoulder like she'd won something precious, as though I were just another obstacle cleared away. "Evan," I whispered, though my voice trembled more than I wanted. "What are you doing?" He turned back to me, grinning with a kind of arrogance I had never seen so plainly. "Don't act surprised, Lauren," he said. "You've been more of a roommate than a wife. Sabrina gives me what you don't, passion, excitement, a reason to wake up in the morning." The words landed like glass, breaking inside my chest. Around us, a few nervous laughs broke the silence, though no one dared move. Mark stood partway. His fists clenched, his expression caught between disbelief and rage. Evan's words twisted the knife deeper, as if all those years together had been an inconvenience he'd finally discarded. I pushed back my chair, the scrape loud enough to echo. My heels struck the floor like a drumbeat as I crossed the space between us. I demanded he repeat himself, my voice low and firm. His eyes gleamed, his head tilting with that same smugness. "You heard me? Sabrina is everything you're not." Before I could think, my hand rose and struck his cheek with a crack that cut through the room. His head snapped sideways, and for a heartbeat, the arrogance vanished. The sound hung in the air, shocking enough that a few guests actually clapped before catching themselves. Sabrina's face flushed, and she pulled on his sleeve, whispering urgently. I didn't let her finish. "Don't touch me." I spat my words, trembling with fury. "You think you're special? You're nothing more than his distraction." My eyes met Evan's, and my chest tightened as I forced myself to speak. "You've just declared war in front of everyone we know." He stood frozen, his cheek blazing red, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. For once, the man who always had a polished line was speechless. I picked up my clutch, straightened my shoulders, and turned to the guests who couldn't stop staring. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. "It seems my husband wanted a show tonight. Let him choke on it." I walked out before the silence could swallow me. Behind me, I heard Mark's voice cut across the room at last. "Sabrina, we'll talk at home." He snapped his tone hard. "Don't bother coming with me tonight." The room broke into murmurs again, but I didn't stop to hear the rest. The hallway outside was cooler, the air sharp against my skin. My hands trembled as I pushed open the heavy doors, but underneath the shaking, something deeper stirred. Humiliation burned hot in my chest, but it wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of something else, something I couldn't yet name. That night, sitting alone in the quiet of my kitchen, the refrigerator's hum, the only sound, I let the shock roll over me. I traced the rim of a mug I hadn't touched, staring into nothing. My mind pulled back through the years, through the choices that had carried me to this point. I had been 24 when I first met Evan, full of ambition and ideas, convinced I could build a career that mattered. He was 6 years older, confident in a way that felt protective. He noticed me, or at least he made me believe he did. Against my better judgment, I fell fast. By the time we married, I had already given up more than I realized. My parents handed me my inheritance from my late grandfather on the day we signed the papers for our first house. "Invest it wisely," my mother said, her voice trembling as she passed me the check. I believed I was. Evan wanted to grow the family contracting business, and I poured my grandfather's hard-earned savings into his dream. He promised it would double, that we'd never worry again. And for a while, it seemed true. Our daughter Ava was born 2 years later, her laughter filling every corner of that little house. I loved her with everything in me, but motherhood became the whole of my identity in a way I hadn't expected. Evan's world expanded, his suit sharper, his dinners longer, his circles larger. Mine contracted into laundry cycles, scraped knees, and school pickups. I told myself it was love that sacrifice was the foundation of family. But the warning signs had been there, creeping in like shadows at the edge of a room. Nights at the office, his phone buzzing with calls, he stepped outside to take vague explanations about clients in crisis. And then Sabrina. She appeared with her polished smile and casseroles, laughing too easily at his stories in the driveway, letting her hand linger when she passed him a plate. I watched uneasy, but I convinced myself I was imagining it. One night, when his late returns grew too obvious, I asked him outright. "Do you like her?" I whispered, hoping he'd deny it. Firmly, give me something to hold on to. He chuckled, pulled me close, and called me paranoid. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Even when Ava mentioned casually Daddy spends a lot of time at Miss Sabrina's house, I brushed it off. Maybe he's helping with something, I told myself, though the words rang hollow. I buried the unease with chores and neighborhood smiles, refusing to see what was right before me. The anniversary dinner was only the explosion at the end of a long erosion. The cracks had been there for years. That night they split wide enough for everyone to see. And when Ava's small voice later asked me why Daddy was holding Sabrina's hand in the backyard, I could no longer pretend. Her words pierced through every excuse I had clung to, leaving me with nothing but the truth. I had lost myself in his dream. I had poured everything, my money, my time, my trust into a man who gambled it away on someone who lived across the street. And as I tucked my daughter into bed that night, her stuffed bear tucked under her arm, I knew something had shifted inside me. The morning after the anniversary dinner, I woke with eyes swollen from tears that hadn't stopped until dawn. My throat was raw, my body heavy, but underneath the ache, something colder had taken root. The grief that had consumed me the night before was gone, replaced by a hard, clear certainty. Evan thought his betrayal had ended me. He had no idea it had carved out a new version of me, one willing to see the truth without excuses. I moved through the house in silence. Ava still asleep in her room, sunlight slipping through the blinds in thin, pale lines. The place looked the same, but it no longer felt like my home. Every corner carried a memory, soured by what I now knew. The kitchen where Sabrina had leaned against the counter, laughing at one of Evan's stories. The porch where he had waved across the street at her, as if I wasn't standing beside him. Even the smell of his cologne on the jacket tossed over a chair made my stomach turn. The ache deepened when I folded Ava's laundry later that day. She walked into the room holding her bear, her voice soft but steady, as she asked why Daddy had been holding Miss Sabrina's hand in the backyard. "I thought only mommies and daddies did that," she said with childlike honesty, her nose wrinkling as she added, "He even kissed her. Daddy said it was a secret game." Her words hit me like a blow. My hands froze on the cotton of her pajamas. My breath caught. There was no explaining away what she had seen. No story I could tell myself anymore. I sank onto the bed, and Ava climbed up beside me, resting her head against my shoulder, with the ease only a child could have, unaware of the weight her words carried. I wrapped my arm around her, though my own body felt unsteady. For months, I had wondered, doubted, tried to believe him. But hearing it from her, seeing it through her innocent eyes, was a truth I could never unhear. The betrayal wasn't just mine anymore. It had touched my daughter too. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Ava had fallen asleep. The lamp cast a weak circle of light on the paperwork scattered before me. Bills, contracts, bank statements. Each number told a story, one I had ignored for too long. Evan's spending habits were there in black and white, the dinners, the trips, the purchases he never explained. My grandfather's inheritance had been the seed money for all of this, the business he flaunted as his own success. And I had handed it to him without hesitation. My mother's warning echoed in my head as I flipped through the papers. She had told me not to lose myself in another person's dream, that no man's ambition was worth my own erasure. I had smiled and assured her I knew what I was doing. Now I understood she had seen what I refused to admit. In the days that followed, the house became a stage where I wore a mask of calm for Ava's sake. I made her breakfast, packed her school bag, tucked her in at night. But when the door closed and her breathing deepened, I let the tears come. I grieved the years I had spent shrinking myself so Evan could appear larger. I grieved the career I had let fade, the friendships I had neglected, the woman I had silenced to be his wife. Evenings stretched into lonely vigils, me sitting by the window, listening for the sound of his truck pulling in. He came home later and later, smelling of liquor, or carrying the faint perfume I now recognized as hers. When he walked past me without meeting my eyes, I realized something he didn't care if I knew. In his mind, I was already defeated. I found myself staring at photographs I once treasured. Our wedding portrait, his hand wrapped around mine. The family picture at Ava's third birthday party, balloons in the background, and cake on her cheeks. Looking at them now felt like staring at strangers. The smiles didn't belong to the life we had built. They were just snapshots of a dream I had worked to hold together, while he dismantled it piece by piece. One evening, I pulled down a box of keepsakes from the top shelf of our closet. Inside were cards Evan had once written words about forever, and loyalty scrawled in his handwriting. I read them slowly, almost as if searching for a man who no longer existed. But the longer I stared, the more I saw the hollow promises for what they were. Lines meant to charm, not to endure. I set the cards aside and closed the lid. They were relics of a story I no longer wanted to tell myself. The silence between us grew heavier. He didn't ask where I went during the day, and I didn't ask who he saw. But inside, something was shifting. The tears that once fell easily dried up. In their place came a stillness, a sharpening of thought. My sorrow was cooling into something else, a plan forming in the quiet hours, though I hadn't yet given it words. One night, as I tucked Ava into bed, she looked at me with wide, searching eyes. "Mommy," she whispered, "are we going to be okay?" My throat tightened, but I smoothed her hair and kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly. "We're going to be okay." It was the first promise I made that I intended to keep, no matter what it cost me. As the days blurred together, I felt myself shedding the woman who had once made excuses, who had once chosen silence over confrontation. Evan had mistaken my quiet for weakness. He had no idea that in that quiet, something was building. I was no longer mourning what I had lost. I was preparing to reclaim what was mine. By the time another week passed, the grief that had kept me sleepless no longer felt like a weight. It felt like fuel. I stood at the window one evening, watching the last of the daylight fall across the street, where Sabrina's porch light flickered on. A storm of humiliation and betrayal had stripped away the life I thought I had, but what remained in me was sharper than pain. I wasn't finished. Not with Evan, not with Sabrina, and certainly not with the version of myself I had nearly forgotten. By the time another dawn broke, I no longer recognized the woman staring back at me in the mirror. The redness around my eyes had faded into something sharper, my mouth set with a firmness I hadn't seen in years. Evan thought his betrayal had hollowed me out. Instead, it had stripped away every illusion I clung to. What remained was lean and certain. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to wait for him to choose me again. I was going to choose myself. The first move came as naturally as breathing. While Ava sat at the kitchen table coloring, I slipped into the office. Evan had always treated the desktop computer as outdated, too clunky for his important work. But I had been the one paying the bills for years, the one who knew every login, every password he recycled. Within an hour, I had done what he would never expect. I froze the joint accounts, rerouted our savings into an account under my name, and cut off the credit cards he carried like trophies. By the time he reached for his wallet later that evening, the world would already look different. The second step was legal. I scrolled through my contacts until I landed on a name I had stored years ago after a charity auction, Marissa Bennett. She was a divorce attorney, the kind of woman who shook your hand like steel and spoke in plain sentences. I had never imagined I would need her, but when I called her, voice was steady. I told her everything Evan's affair, the inheritance money, the years of sacrifice. She didn't pause. "You've got leverage," she said. "The inheritance, the child, the proof of infidelity. We can make him bleed. Start documenting everything." Her certainty steadied me. For the first time since that humiliating dinner, I felt as if someone else saw the map I was beginning to trace in my head. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was strategy. That afternoon, while Ava napped, I began to pack. Not everything, not yet. Just essentials, the clothes that mattered, a few keepsakes, the photo albums that told the story of Ava's early years. I didn't box them up because I wanted to save the marriage. I did it because I wanted to decide what came with me when I left. Everything else could rot in the shadows Evan had invited into our home. By nightfall, the plan had shape. Financial control, legal counsel, emotional distance. My heart still ached, but the pain no longer swallowed me whole. It fueled me. I wasn't the wife waiting at the window anymore. I was the woman quietly setting fire to the foundation he had built on my back. When Evan finally came through the door, the smell of bourbon clung to him. His tie was loose, his steps heavy with the confidence of a man who thought he still owned the room. His eyes fell on the half-packed boxes stacked near the hallway, and he smirked. "What's this Lauren A. tantrum? You'll cool off once you realize I'm not leaving Sabrina." I didn't flinch. I held up the envelope I'd received from Marissa's office earlier that day. The seal was still crisp. "This isn't a tantrum," I said evenly. "It's the beginning of your end." The smirk faltered. He reached for the envelope, but I didn't let go until his face had gone pale. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "Divorce papers," I said. My voice didn't shake. "And before you start shouting, you should know the accounts are frozen, the credit cards won't work, and the house will be listed within the month. You've already lost more than you realize." For the first time in years, I saw the crack in his armor. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted as if searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. "You can't do this," he hissed, stepping closer. But I didn't back away. I had spent too many years shrinking so he could fill the space. "Not anymore." "I already did," I told him. "Every move you make from here on out, I'll be 3 steps ahead. You humiliated me in public. You dragged our daughter into your lies. You thought I'd crumble, but I'm going to dismantle you piece by piece until there's nothing left." His face darkened, the arrogance slipping into something almost desperate. "Lauren, wait, let's talk about this. You don't know what you're doing." But I did. I turned my back on him, picked up Ava's small overnight bag, and carried it toward the front door. Over my shoulder, I left him with the only truth he needed to hear. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking my life back. The night air was cool as I stepped outside, Ava's hand tucked into mine. Behind me, silence filled the house that had once been ours. For the first time, it wasn't my silence. It was his. The next morning brought proof that my actions had already started to ripple. My phone buzzed with alerts, 3 failed ATM withdrawals within an hour. By mid-morning, Marissa called. "He's panicking," she said with satisfaction. "He's already contacted the bank demanding to know why nothing works. Don't worry, it's airtight. He can't touch a cent without your signature now." I pictured him standing at a teller's counter, voice rising, face flushed. The thought didn't erase the ache in my chest, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks, a taste of justice. Word traveled quickly in our neighborhood. I hadn't seen it myself, but a friend told me that Mark had locked Sabrina out of their house the night after the anniversary dinner. He'd tossed her clothes onto the lawn while half the cul-de-sac looked on. She had run straight to Evan only to discover his cards didn't work either. No hotel suite, no escape, just 2 cheaters exposed and stranded, their comforts stripped as quickly as their disguises. Back at my mother's house, where Ava and I were staying, I found small moments of steadiness. Each night, I tucked her into bed under my grandmother's quilt, her breathing soft and even. The fear that had once knotted in my stomach gave way to resolve. I was still grieving, but now I was grieving while moving forward. By the end of that week, Evan's silence was louder than any of his old speeches. He didn't call, didn't storm in, didn't send messages that could reach me. Every attempt came through lawyers now, and Marissa blocked what she needed to. On Friday night, the doorbell rang at my mother's house. I dried my hands from the dishes and peered through the curtain. Evan stood on the porch, his shirt wrinkled, his hair unkempt, eyes wild with something that looked too close to fear. I opened the door but left the screen between us. "Lauren, please," he said, his voice cracking. "Can we talk?" "There's nothing left to say," I replied. He pressed his palms against the screen, his words tumbling over each other. "I made a mistake. I know I did, but you can't just cut me off from everything. I don't have access to my money. I don't have anywhere to go." The desperation would have once softened me, but now it only revealed how far he had fallen. "You humiliated me in front of everyone we know," I said quietly. You paraded Sabrina into my anniversary dinner. You lied to our daughter. And now you want sympathy. His eyes glistened, but I didn't flinch. He stammered. I just need you to stop this. I leaned closer, my voice sharp. No, Evan, this is only the beginning. Then I shut the door. The thud echoed through the house, the final punctuation to his plea. I locked it and turned off the porch light, my hands steady as I walked back to the kitchen. After I closed the door on Evan's desperate face that night, a strange calm settled over me. For weeks, I had been on edge, bracing for the next lie, the next humiliation. But shutting him out of my mother's home gave me something I hadn't felt in years: control. He had crossed lines I could never forgive, and now I was drawing my own. The war had begun, and I was no longer afraid to fight. The following days passed quietly at first. I went about my routines, walking Ava to school, making dinners with my mother, and sorting through the paperwork Marissa sent me. Evan stayed silent, at least where I could hear him. His messages no longer reached me directly. Everything funneled through lawyers now. But silence was never his strength. I knew he would try something, and I didn't have to wait long to see it. 2 weeks later, his parents extended an invitation for Sunday dinner at the country club we had attended with them many times before. My instinct was to decline to avoid whatever trap Evan might be setting. But then, Claire, his older sister, called me herself. Her voice dropped low, almost conspiratorial. "Lauren," she said, "please come. Trust me, you'll want to be there." There was something in her tone that made me pause. Against my better judgment, I agreed. That evening, I dressed simply, a navy blouse and dark skirt that wouldn't draw too much attention. Ava held my hand as we walked into the dining hall, her hair braided neatly, her small steps steady. The room was full, couples in suits and dresses, neighbors whispering behind linen napkins, waiters darting with trays. And there at the center sat Evan. His shoulders squared, his expression carefully composed. He stood the moment he saw me, his voice pitched loud enough for every table nearby to hear. "Ah, Lauren," he said with forced warmth. "You actually came. Everyone's been waiting to hear your side of things." My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a dinner. It was an ambush. He wanted the chance to paint himself as the victim to control the narrative before I could speak. His mother, Evelyn, rose and embraced me tightly. "We're glad you're here, dear," she whispered into my ear. "Say what you need to say." Her grip lingered longer than I expected, and I realized she knew more than she was letting on. I nodded, steadying myself. We took our seats, and Evan wasted no time. He raised his voice, addressing not just me, but the entire room. "Look, everyone, I've admitted I made mistakes, but dragging this through lawyers, freezing accounts, embarrassing me in public, that isn't fair. We're family. We should handle this privately with dignity." Murmurs rippled across the tables. His tone was measured, rehearsed, dripping with false reasonableness. He leaned back smug, certain he had regained control. I let him finish before reaching into my purse. Without a word, I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and placed it on the table. The recording played clearly. Evan's voice slurred with drink, laughing with Sabrina. "She's so clueless. Lauren actually thinks I'm at the office. You're the best thing in my life, Sabrina. My wife is just the safety net." Gasps rose around the room. A fork clattered onto a plate. Evelyn's hand shot to her mouth, and Richard's jaw hardened as he stared at his son. Claire's eyes narrowed, fury flashing across her face. Evan lunged for the phone, but I snatched it back before he could touch it. "Don't," I warned, my voice sharp. I stood, the scrape of my chair cutting through the silence. Every eye in the hall turned toward me. For 10 years, I sacrificed for this man. I gave him my inheritance to build his business. I raised our daughter while he played the role of a devoted husband. I lifted the phone, its glow still bright. And this is what I received in return: lies, humiliation, and an affair with our neighbor. Whispers broke out the name Sabrina, passing from table to table like wildfire. I leaned closer to Evan, my voice low but sharp enough to carry to the nearest tables. You thought you'd embarrass me again tonight. But here's the truth. I am not the woman you humiliate. I am the woman who ends you. The words seemed to land with weight. Heads turned, murmurs swelled into nods, and within seconds, the tide of the room shifted. Evan's face flushed crimson. He looked around desperately for support, but all he found were judging stares. Evelyn stood abruptly, her voice trembling with fury. Enough, Evan. You've shamed this family. Do you have any idea what you've done to Lauren? To Ava, Richard's voice followed, stern and final. You're no son of mine if this is how you treat your family. Claire crossed her arms, her glare unwavering. You disgust me. The dining hall buzzed with whispers, waiters pausing mid-step to listen, neighbors shaking their heads. Evan's carefully rehearsed act crumbled in seconds. And then the final blow came. The doors at the back of the hall swung open, and Sabrina appeared. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes red from crying. She locked eyes with Evan, and for the first time, he froze. I can't do this anymore, she announced, her voice cracking but loud enough for the room to hear. Mark served me papers this morning. I've lost my home, my reputation, and it's because of you. We're done, Evan. The gasp that followed was deafening. Sabrina turned and stormed out, her heels clattering like gunfire against the polished floor. Evan stood alone, abandoned in every sense of the word. I leaned in one final time, my voice calm, precise, unforgettable. You wanted to be the man who left me for her. Congratulations. Now you're the man left by everyone. The silence that followed was heavy, then broken by the sound of someone clapping. Another joined, then another, until the hall filled with applause. I took Ava's hand and walked out, the sound chasing me down the corridor. Evan didn't follow. That night, as I tucked Ava into bed, her small fingers curled around mine, I realized the balance had shifted completely. Evan wasn't the man in control anymore. He was the man the city whispered about with disdain. By the time the applause faded at the country club, I knew I had turned a corner. Evan wasn't just a husband caught cheating anymore. He was a man whose mask had cracked in public, and everyone had seen the face beneath it. But humiliation inside four walls wasn't enough for him to understand the weight of what he had done. He had always needed an audience, and the city itself was about to become one. 2 mornings later, a friend texted me a link with the words, "You need to see this." I clicked, and there was Evan sitting across from Daniel Foster on a local morning show, dressed in a pressed blue suit and trying to look composed. The caption at the bottom of the screen read, "Betrayed husband or villain." I nearly laughed at the audacity. Evan leaned forward, his voice smooth, his eyes just the right amount of tired. Yes, I made mistakes, he told the camera, but my wife blindsided me. She froze. My accounts took my daughter and humiliated me in front of everyone. All I ever wanted was to feel loved again. The host nodded sympathetically, feeding his performance. Do you feel she overreacted? I think she's vindictive, Evan said, lowering his voice, as if confiding in the viewers. And it breaks my heart, because at the end of the day, I still love her. I put the phone down before I threw it across the room. Love. After he dragged Sabrina into my anniversary dinner, mocked me behind my back, and kissed another woman where our daughter could see. It was his last weapon, the one he thought might still cut through. But this wasn't about love anymore. It was about power. What Evan didn't realize was that power didn't live in his charm or his bank account anymore. Power lived online, and there the tide had already turned. By the afternoon, clips of his interview spread across Facebook and Twitter. At first, reactions were mixed. Some people pitied him, others doubted his sincerity. Then, the truth started spilling out. Screenshots of his messages leaked where he bragged about keeping me around for appearances while living freely with Sabrina. One photo showed him shirtless in her kitchen, wearing the watch I had given him for our 5th anniversary. An audio recording surfaced of him laughing with a friend saying, "If Lauren finds out who cares, she'll never leave. She needs me." The internet devoured every piece. By evening, hashtags were trending Team Lauren Pierce, the deceiver, Kansas City cheater. Comment sections filled with women dismantling his act, pointing out every contradiction. Imagine humiliating your wife at her own anniversary dinner and then crying on TV, one wrote. Another said, "This man called her a safety net and now says he loves her. No thanks." The turning point came when a video from the country club leaked. Someone had filmed the confrontation, capturing me, holding up my phone, my voice steady as I told him, "I am not the woman you humiliate. I am the woman who ends you." That 30-second clip exploded. It was shared thousands of times, spliced into TikToks, and captioned with words like, "Energy we all need," and "When she finally chooses herself." For days, my name flooded timelines, not in pity, but in power. Women across the country lip-synced to my words, turning my pain into a rallying cry. Even Ava's school friends' parents pulled me aside in the parking lot to tell me they had seen the clip and were proud of me. Meanwhile, Evan's business crumbled under the weight of the scandal. Clients canceled contracts, not wanting their names tied to his reputation. His company's social media pages were flooded with one-star reviews. The same men who used to slap him on the back at golf tournaments now ghosted his calls. Amanda didn't fare much better. Photos of her clothes scattered across her lawn resurfaced, fueling the fire online. Bloggers wrote about how women like me sacrifice for years only to be discarded. She went from polished influencer to whispered warning, her name linked to mine in ways she hadn't expected. By the end of the week, Evan posted a shaky apology on his personal page. "I want to apologize to my wife and daughter for the pain I've caused," he wrote. "I ask for privacy as we heal." Privacy was a luxury he no longer had. The damage had been done, and this time he couldn't control the story. Ava was too young to understand hashtags or viral clips, thank God. But even she noticed the change. When I dropped her off at school, other mothers hugged me tightly, telling me, "We saw everything. You're stronger than most of us could ever be." My own mother, cautious and traditional, sat beside me one night and took my hand. "I've never been prouder of you," she said softly. "You're showing Ava what it means to stand tall." Evan, on the other hand, spiraled into silence. He stopped showing his face in public, stopped answering calls. Amanda vanished too, her social circle scattering in the wake of her choices. The man who once strutted through Kansas City as though he owned it now became a ghost in his own city. I lay in bed one night, Ava's soft breathing beside me, scrolling past yet another clip of myself. My own voice echoed back, fierce and steady. "I am not the woman you humiliate. I am the woman who ends you." That wasn't just a line anymore. It was a truth I had carved into my bones. Evan hadn't only lost control of me, he had lost control of the story. And in this new world, stories were everything. When the court date finally arrived, the air inside the courthouse felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of every broken promise we had lived through. I walked in with Marisa by my side, her expression calm, her files stacked neatly in her arms. Evan was already seated at the opposite table, his suit wrinkled, his eyes ringed with sleepless nights. For once, he didn't look larger than life. He looked cornered. Judge Harold Simmons entered the room with measured steps, his gaze sharp as he scanned the courtroom. We rose, then sat, the creak of chairs echoing louder than it should have. The proceedings began without ceremony. Marissa laid out the evidence like bricks in a wall, my inheritance traced into his business accounts, screenshots of his infidelity, recordings of his arrogance, witness statements from neighbors and friends. Every piece told the same story: betrayal, misuse, humiliation. Evan tried to protest, his voice rising, but Judge Simmons cut him off. "You will speak when I ask you to, Mr. Pierce. Until then, sit down." The gavel's echo silenced him, and I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen before: fear. When it was my turn, I spoke quietly but firmly. I told the court about the inheritance my grandfather had left me, money I entrusted to Evan with the promise of building a future together. I described the nights I stayed home with Ava while he claimed to be working late. I explained how he had paraded Sabrina into our anniversary dinner as if my life were disposable. My voice shook once, but I steadied it. I wasn't there to crumble. I was there to reclaim what was mine. The judge listened intently, his brow furrowed. When Evan's attorney tried to frame me as vindictive, Marissa rose with calm precision. She slid documents across the table, proof of financial misuse text logs, dripping with his contempt photos of him in Sabrina's kitchen. The evidence spoke louder than either of us ever could. By midday, the verdict came. Judge Simmons' tone was firm, leaving no room for doubt. This court grants full custody of Ava Pierce to her mother, Lauren Pierce. Sole ownership of the marital home is awarded to her, along with a controlling share of Pierce & Sons Contracting, founded on funds that were legally hers to begin with. Mr. Pierce, your conduct has shown repeated disregard for your marriage, your finances, and your role as a father. Consider this balance restored. The gavel struck final and sharp. Evan's face went crimson, his mouth opening in protest. "She's robbing me blind," he shouted, but the judge's glare silenced him. "You robbed your wife of dignity, Mr. Pierce. This court won't allow you to rob her of her future as well." I walked out of that courtroom with Ava's small hand in mine, Marissa at my side, and a weight lifted from my shoulders. The whispers that once followed me in the grocery store or at school drop-offs had changed. People no longer looked at me with pity. They looked at him with disdain. The fallout spread quickly. Evan's father, Richard, who had once bragged about his son's business at every cocktail party, refused to speak to him. "You've disgraced us," I overheard him say in the hallway outside court, his voice cutting like steel. Evelyn didn't argue. Her silence was its own verdict. Even Claire, his sister, turned her back, telling me quietly, "I can't support him, not after what he did to you and Ava." As for Sabrina, her collapse was swift. Mark finalized their divorce within weeks, citing her affair in every line. She lost her home, her reputation, and the glossy online following she once flaunted. Friends who had crowded her kitchen for wine nights stopped answering her calls. The last I heard, she was sleeping on a cousin's couch, her bright dresses pawned for cash. Evan, stripped of his mistress and his allies, faced the wreckage alone. With his accounts frozen and contracts canceled, he defaulted on loans. His car was repossessed, his office lease terminated. The man who once wore tailored suits and shook hands like he owned the city now begged old acquaintances for help, and most refused to answer. When the house was officially awarded to me, I returned with movers to clear out the rest of his belongings. Evan wasn't there. He couldn't afford to be. But on the counter, I found a folded letter, his handwriting rushed and uneven. "Please, Lauren, don't take everything. I have nowhere to go." But I did take everything. Everything he had built with my inheritance. Everything he had flaunted while discarding me. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was justice. Weeks later, word spread that Evan was staying at a rundown motel on the edge of town, trading stories with truckers for discounted rates. The man who once dined under chandeliers now ate fast food from paper bags alone. He had once towered over me with arrogance. Now, he was nothing more than the ruins of his own choices. I slept soundly for the first time in years. I thought the courtroom verdict would be the last time our paths crossed. But a few weeks later, Marissa called to say Evan had been evicted from the motel he'd been living in. He wanted to meet me one last time at the house we once shared. Every part of me wanted to refuse, but something deeper told me I needed to see it through to close the door myself, not leave it ajar. The house felt hollow when I walked in. Dust lined the windowsills, the air carried the stale bite of bourbon. Evan sat on the bare floor of the living room, his shoulders hunched, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red from sleepless nights. He rose quickly when he saw me, as if my presence sparked a momentary illusion of hope. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice rough. He shuffled closer, his words tumbling out in a plea. "I've lost everything. The business, the house, even Sabrina. My family won't speak to me. I'm nothing without you." I didn't move from the doorway. I folded my arms, my voice calm but steady. "You're not nothing because of me. You're nothing because of you." His tears fell faster as he sank to his knees. "I made a terrible mistake. Please, don't leave me like this. I'll change. I'll be the man you wanted me to be." His hands pressed together as if prayer could rewrite the past. There was a time I might have softened, but not anymore. I stepped close enough for him to see the certainty in my eyes. "No, Evan, you'll never be that man because you never wanted to be. And I won't carry your burden any longer." His lips trembled. "Then what am I supposed to do?" I leaned down, my voice low, almost gentle, but sharp enough to end the last illusion he held. "Live with the truth. You are the architect of your own destruction." He froze at those words as though they crushed what little remained of him. His shoulders slumped, his face gray with defeat. I turned and walked toward the door, the sound of my footsteps filling the emptiness. When I glanced back, he was still kneeling on the bare floor, a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. I didn't look back again. I closed the door without regret, and with it, the chapter of my life that had once belonged to him. A year later, our world looked nothing like the ashes he left behind. Ava and I moved into a small townhouse near her school. She decorated her room with fairy lights and posters humming in the mornings as she brushed her hair. The heaviness in her eyes was gone, replaced by the brightness of a child who felt safe again. As for me, I returned to the career I had put aside years earlier. With Marissa's encouragement, I used the settlement to launch my own marketing firm. What began with a desk in my living room grew into a thriving business staffed by women who knew what it meant to start over. Each project reminded me that I had value not as someone's wife, but as myself. Evan faded into the background of Kansas City life. The last I heard, he was sleeping in a friend's basement, picking up odd jobs when someone was desperate enough to hire him. The man who once strutted into rooms as if the world owed him attention was now a cautionary tale. Even Sabrina disappeared from view, her name spoken only in whispers of what betrayal can cost. There are nights when I sit on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights flicker, remembering how it all began with a dress, a dinner, and a smirk that shattered the life I thought I had. I remember the sting of humiliation, the silence of grief, and the moment I found my voice again. Betrayal didn't destroy me. It revealed me. I learned that dignity doesn't come from the promises someone else keeps. It comes from the moment you decide to stop shrinking yourself for the comfort of another. Evan may have been the storm that tore through my life, but I was the rebuilding brick by brick until the walls stood taller than before. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke most to you. Share your thoughts in the comments if you feel moved to, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories. You're always welcome here.